Hi, I'm Andy Acton.
And I'm Chris Strevens.
This is Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. Whenever we talk to people, we always start at a similar place, which is about childhood, upbringing, family. But Catherine really did encapsulate how her early years have so heavily influenced her career and the skills she got as a youngster.
And continue to. I think it's always like that. What was that film? I don't know, Shrek, where there's the donkey says ogres are like onions, and people are like onions, aren't they? There's so many layers to them.
Yeah.
You start talking to people and you see one thing, but actually by talking to people you find out what's below that layer and how that layer impacts upon the way they are and how they present themselves.
But such a wealth of experience from, living overseas and coming back and moving around, and then, qualifying in the north of England, but then going and doing hospital work and being in a partnership, and then working on the industry side of the profession in Denplan and Simplyhealth. It really is
wide and varied.
And I think Catherine said herself that I think sometimes as a clinician, it's easy to forget how many roles there are you can play in dentistry supporting the profession. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a handpiece.
Yeah, how many skills you've got that are transferable to other things if you want to transfer them.
Yeah, no,
that's brilliant. Very
really
good.
Right, it's Monday at 7 a.m. So what's that mean?
It means possibly another Dentology podcast is about to be released to our listeners' ears and delectation.
Delectation?
Do you know that?
I don't think we've had a delectation.
I went back to the old music hall thing or whatever it was.
I think we're 190 plus episodes, and I don't think we've had a delectation.
No. I thought I'd bring it in.
Well, very much needed.
There we go.
Very much
I
needed.
say to you, sir.
So today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Catherine Rutland joining us. Catherine is a dentist, clinical director at Simplyhealth and Denplan, and also the director of policy and research at the Association of Dental Groups, the ADG.
That's a business card.
It is, isn't it? Welcome, Catherine. How are you doing?
Yeah, hello.
Good, thank you, and thank you very much for having me.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's there's a travesty that this goes out as a podcast, which is audio only, but we do put it on YouTube as well because it helps. And anybody who's on YouTube watching this, and this will push people to it.
So this will make them go
over
and watch
Catherine's shoulder. There's a giraffe looking in the window, and it's actually a photograph that you took yourself. You were telling us before.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I do like a little bit of photography if I can.
No, you should have let it go, a giraffe looking through the window, because people have gone, what? Where is this woman living?
Well, we did think, we were talking before, we kind of went through Kenya and Nairobi, and we found out that actually you were in South Africa, but it's a stunning photograph.
Thank you.
Regent's Park Zoo.
Yes.
Imagine. No, mustn't. No.
Imagine. So this is Dentology. It's the business of dentistry, but fundamentally it's actually about people and their life stories. So can you kind of give us an insight to what your childhood was like, where you got brought up, take us back to kind of the early years of Catherine and what that looked like?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Oxford and lived there till I was just 8, and then was lucky enough to move to Kenya for nearly 6 years. So very formative part of my childhood. I came back when I was almost 14. So
wow. Why did you move to Kenya?
My dad is an ex-civil engineer, specialised in water. So he went on secondment from the British government, and we stayed there. Originally, we were going for 2.5 years, and it was nice and we liked it, so we stayed for longer. So
nice.
Fantastic place to grow up. Feel very privileged, I think, now to look back on it. Very much an outdoor lifestyle. I'm quite sporty, so for me, I think when I look back on it, must have been not so great for anybody who wasn't sporty, but it was like an hour of sport every day after lessons and so on at school. And but a lot of outside, quite different to how it is now, but things like all the game parks, we used to go and camp in them in all our holidays, just take our tent. There might be a standpipe if you were lucky on the campsite, and that was it. I'm not sure you were allowed to do that anymore, but it was great. We used to go there and go on safari sort of most holidays, or to the coast, which is absolutely beautiful, of course. So so really, really lovely childhood. And we lived in Nairobi, so you were in kind of a very even temperature all year. Right. I think we put a jumper on to go to school. That was a big thing. We officially had blazers, but I don't think we ever wore them. So, so really lovely. And then moved moved back to Oxford originally, and then for a year, and then to Beaconsfield, which is where my parents still are. So,
but when you were in Kenya, was it very much kind of expat type community, or were you involved in kind of you?
Predominantly, but at that stage it was very, very open. It was very, it was safe, and so it was, I think, quite different, I think, to how it is now. I think then, we as kids, we did what we wanted to, went where we wanted to. So although we were yes, probably living in a more expat community, I think the environment was, as I say, quite safe. It started to get a little bit unsafe as we were leaving, which was one of the reasons my parents came back eventually. But for us, we were there at a very lovely time. And of course, as a child, you're not necessarily so aware anyway.
No, absolutely.
What was it like, Catherine, coming back to the UK and going to school at 14?
Yeah, it was hard. Hard. I changed school. We sort of moved back from Kenya back to Oxford because our house was there. Then moved to Beaconsfield. So I kind of moved 3 times in just over a year geographically, but also changed school twice in the first year I was back. So did 4 schools in the space of just over a year. And it was quite tough. I got quite bullied in the first school I was in when I first came back, and mainly because I think I was quite ahead academically, and it was difficult until they realised I could play sport, and then the bullying stopped. But by that point, my parents had decided to move me school-wise. So, and then, as I say, we moved. So I then moved into the grammar school system in Bucks. So it was tough. I think how I coped with it was buried myself in hockey and academic work, really, which was no bad thing.
Must be a big transition to go from living in Kenya with the outdoor lifestyle, probably very nice lifestyle, to then come back to greyness and a different education system. It must be really quite hard.
Has it impacted your ability to cope with change and not become too entrenched? Because I'd have thought
it has.
Having that in your formative years has set you up very well in terms of.
Yeah, I think for, I'm the eldest of 4 children, and I can't, we're 4 and 5.5 years, so quite close together. And I think, all of us have dealt with it differently, if you see what I mean. But I think for me at the age I was, yes, I think it did make me very versatile. I had to shift and adapt to new friends over and over. So I got very good at just, I've just got to throw myself in where I am and deal with that. And I've moved then quite a few times since I've so obviously when I went to university and then afterwards, and it's never bothered me, shall I say. It's not something that I've ever found challenging. So I think although when I first came back it was very tough, I think it has actually given me a life skill to kind of cope on my own.
It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes those lessons, when you're young, those lessons, they don't really feel like lessons. It just feels a bit crap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then as you get older, you realise that actually you've built a resilience and a skill set that lots of people perhaps might not have because just through circumstance, you had to be very adaptable.
And you got through it.
Yeah. And it was at a time, if you think I'm old, so that's a long time ago. And I think at that stage, nobody had any idea what it meant to live anywhere else. Really, nowadays we're much more multicultural. We've got people who do move abroad and so on. But we were really unusual. And I came back, and because a lot of people that I knew in Kenya who did come back here for school went into boarding schools where actually there was a lot of other expat children who understood it and were in the same situation, whereas to come back into mainstream schooling with nobody around you who had any concept, I used to get asked, did you wear a grass skirt, and did you live in a grass hut, and and there's no social media, there's no Instagram,
that's true. I suppose you're informed by the TV shows.
No understanding of what my life had been like that. So
what's interesting, Catherine, is it's in some ways the reverse of what a lot of the dentists that we talk to have experienced in England. We have lots of dentists that have joined us from Iraq and Iran and Africa, India, not so much Africa. And what you're describing must be the opposite end of what they experienced when they came to the UK.
Yeah.
where there's this inbuilt assumption as to what India's like when we don't necessarily know. And
Yeah.
you know, you living in Africa for a number of years and then coming back to England, you know, you've been on the other end of that. So yes, it's quite
So it's a juxtaposition.
yes.
Yeah, and I think I was very lucky in that time frame as well, that it gave me a much wider perspective of the world. Was sort of at the end of the first contract, the end of 2.5 years, so I was 11. My parents traded in the ticket that was our plane tickets to sort of just come back here to see family, traded them in for round the world tickets, and we did a round the world trip. So, you know, flew down to South Africa and then up to Rio, and then we went all the way across South America by literally every form of transport, including backs of lorries and all sorts. And we had color-coded kit as the 4 children. We either all wore blue or we all wore red.
Well,
so
you're like the Von Trapps, aren't you, heading around the world?
So we were going up, you know, sort of Mexican, you know, old palaces and all that kind of things. They could spot us. So we did that, and then up into the States, and then drove all the way across the States. So
what an experience.
How long was that? How long did
so that was over, I think it was over about 6 weeks, and then we came back to England and saw family, and then went home. So it was essentially the whole of the summer holiday.
That's an intense 6 weeks, isn't it, to do that much travelling?
Yeah. Oh, we were on the go. It was like a military operation. So, but things like I did Machu Picchu well before anybody else would think of it. So I think that my parents gave us that amazing opportunity to really see the world at a time when people didn't travel like that. So
what's your mum? Did your mum work or?
So my mum's a teacher.
Okay, right.
And has always worked. And still travels hugely. She still travels hugely. My dad now says, "Oh, I don't need to do that. I'll stay at home." But my mum still. I think my mum's done over 100 countries. She's
Wow.
So she's a big inspiration in that sense, that she's even in her early 80s, she's still out there and she goes to the most bizarre places because she needs that extra country. So she's
And are you the traveller? So do you?
I love to travel as well. Yeah, I think I've done about 56 countries or something.
Oh wow!
So,
you got that app on your phone that you can.
Yes. Beams. I probably shouldn't advertise it. Yeah, but so it gives you that kind of, I suppose it's that sense of confidence as well, that you don't worry. I don't worry about it, and I think having been exposed to so many different cultures at that age, I think that has given me such a wide view of the world, in the sense that you don't know what anybody's going through, and you've got to have an open mind to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's how you.
We haven't even got to dentistry yet.
So it's very easy to judge. Well, I was just thinking, we've done all these travels of the world, and the next obvious place to go is, I guess, Leeds.
Is Leeds?
Leeds, yes.
Of all the glamorous places in the world, you studied dentistry in Leeds.
I know. I had this thing. It's really weird because I think I was, as I said to you before, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I knew what A-levels I had obviously fitted certain subjects, and so just kind of decided to do dentistry. When I look back on it, it was a real fluke, because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I also had this thing as well. My dad's originally from Manchester and my mum's from Birmingham, whereas I had known the south of England. So I got this thing in my head that I was going north.
Right.
Wow.
So I went north. So that's why I ended up in Leeds. It's not, you'll get the gist. There's never really much planning in my scheming. So I get these kinds of whims, and then it's
quite a free spirit.
Yeah, well, I am, but I'm also very organised and planned. But there are certain things that I just don't worry about. So it was, I want to go north. I want to, experience that. So I went to Leeds.
And what was dental school like for you?
Hard in some ways. In other ways, enjoyed it. Got on with it. Found that I was good at clinical dentistry and enjoyed the communication side of dentistry. So, what
was hard about it?
Pardon?
What was hard about it?
I think when you're first there, especially, I think but probably again, because I didn't really know what I was getting into, I think that kind of commitment as a student that you've got really from the beginning of second year, of the hours you're in and you're seeing, you're essentially doing a job. You know, there's you're not going out with all the other students during the week. You're not eating garlic. You're not eating. You know, you're suddenly you are almost living quite a strong professional life, really, from the age of 19. And there's not many
That's quite
degrees
young,
that have that, because medics don't do that. For example, they're on clinics, but they're big groups of them, and they're not individually treating patients. So I think you take on. I think it's the same for dental nurses who start young, and hygienists and therapists, same thing. You take on quite a lot of responsibility from quite a young age.
Do you think that's still the case? Do you think that was the case when you were at dental school, and now it's more like school than the experience that you had?
I mean, we were lucky. We got a huge amount of experience from a practical sense, huge amount. And that stood us well as when we went out into practice. We'd done a lot. I did work in hospital for a couple of years before I went into practice, but the amount of practical work we'd done was huge. You know, I'd taken out well over 100 teeth. I think I'd taken 120 teeth out or something, you know, and some of the graduates now are struggling to get to very small numbers. So we, you know, I think that opportunity that we had certainly from a clinical perspective was a huge advantage as we went out into the world.
Yeah, but it was.
That's interesting. I mean, that's not that long, probably. Even though you're saying you're old, from your training to current training, but how the dilution might not be quite the right word. But I mean, we see people who say, "Oh yeah, this person's never taken out of a molar."
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, okay.
And then it sounds like you've obviously got the bug for going north, because you then went further up
north
to Newcastle, where you were house officer and senior house officer in hospital. And I imagine that gave you an extraordinary amount of clinical and surgical experience.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I did the house jobs in Leeds, and then when I was coming towards the end of that, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Again, there's a pattern here. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do as I was coming to qualifying. I was one of the last years to do 4 year in a term. And most people were applying for jobs in practice, and VT, as it was then, was voluntary still at that stage. It was one of the last years to be voluntary. And I actually, one of the profs walked past me probably a week or so before finals and said, "I haven't seen your application for house jobs." And I was like, "Oh, that'll be because I haven't done one." So he was like, "Well, I expect it on my desk on Monday morning." So, and then got a house job, which I would never have applied for, I don't think, because I wouldn't have thought I was good enough to do it. So so did the house jobs, and then was coming towards the end of that and wasn't sure again what to do. And this rotational senior house officer job came up in Newcastle, and I thought that looks like such a great learning experience. So you went through all the departments of the hospital, you rotated every 6 months. So the experience of that was just such a brilliant job in the sense of the amount that I learned over that time. So yeah, really good. And I enjoyed living up there. Enjoyed living up in the northeast, actually. It was really, really great place. I'm a big walker, so we had a sort of group of us that used to go across the lakes a lot and go up onto the Northeast Coast walk and go into Scotland. So it was a really lovely sort of 3.5 years, sort of not long out of qualification. It was good. We did a lot. Brilliant. Worked hard, played hard. It was good.
Oh, see, that is the night out.
Yeah. So then, following the theme as to whether it was planned or not, you then ended up in a partnership of a private practice in Berkshire for 19 years. And I'm interested in that because partnerships aren't anything like as popular as they used to be. So I'll be interested kind of how that came about, how it started, but also what was those near 2 decades like for you.
And nowhere near Newcastle.
No.
And nowhere near Newcastle. Yeah. So I sort of I stayed in hospital long enough to decide that actually I didn't want to specialise. And I was getting to that stage where I had to specialise, and I decided that actually I wanted to be in general practice. So I went in and did my VT, as it was then, in Sunderland, of all places. So my first practice job was in Sunderland, and then moved down really to be closer to home. I think I got married and wanted to be closer to home, so we moved back down, and I ended up as an associate in Reading. And then the partnership was with my ex-husband, so we bought the practice originally sort of end of 98. I was 13 weeks pregnant. Excellent timing.
Good timing.
Perfect.
And I think Frank Taylor and Associates were the agent for the guy we bought it off.
Oh,
so there
right.
you are. There's a little bit of a connection many years ago. So I originally wasn't going to join the practice. I originally was going to continue as an associate, but it kind of got to the point very quickly that it wasn't, it was more sensible for us to be in the partnership together. And I realised that my strength was in the business side of it. And I grew and learnt over that time. And within that sort of time period, I think things like we turned the business around hugely. We had a lot of problems with it when we first started. Actually, in a funny way, it's not funny now. It wasn't funny then. Was we had a Denplan list that was quite difficult when we bought it, and had to turn that round. And if you'd asked me then if I was going to be doing all that I do now, I probably would have cried and hit you. But I am the walking proof that you can turn around, lists and sort them out and create a very successful practice out of that. And it did require, a lot of work and a lot of patience, but it's been one of the things for my current role that's given me such an advantage when I speak to people, that when you've gone through really a business at the first couple of years that you're really on the edge, and you've been two high earning associates, and then suddenly your thing and the revenue look at you because, well, why were you two high earning associates and now you're only earning this? And so, things like, learned hugely. But as I say, I think the business side of it, I started to really love. So I started to take on all the accounts and do all the bookkeeping and so on. And I loved the planning. I loved, having to go into banks and convince them to let us buy the building on the top of the fact that we only just bought the practice and managed to do that with sort of 10 months of decent accounts. So put a business plan together for that and so on. So my learning was quite steep at that point, but I enjoyed it. And it gave me a real... a real sort of, I suppose, insight into business and into dental practices that I think, the world's changed quite a lot now. Business practices, as you both know, are much, much more focused on business.
I was going to ask you, did you...
I used to ask people, well, what's your hourly rate? Or how much does it cost you to run your surgeries? If you were speaking to other dentists to try and gauge where we were and so on. And people had no idea.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you have any business training, or was it just picking it up
learn
as
on
you
the
went?
job? I always loved maths. When I was at school, the school really wanted me to carry on and do maths and go, apply for Oxford and so on, just do straight maths. And I was like, I love maths, but I'm not going to do that. That's going to lead me down a very specific path. So, but I love them. I do love numbers. So I think learning that and understanding it and the challenge, I guess, of turning the business round and turning it into, a very well-running, profitable practice was, there was a challenge in that. And it, was all practices. It went through its ups and downs, and but we worked hard and got it to a really good place.
And how did you manage that time-wise? Because at this point, you're still a clinician. You've got a young family. You're a partner in the practice. And you're dealing with the business side of things, which you'll enjoy. That to me sounds like it's a 9-day-a-week job.
Oh yeah, it is.
So what was the balance between clinical, family and business? How did that split out?
Just had to fit it in. So I think...
how many clinical days were you at this time?
So we used to split our days so that we would one of us would start early and finish early to pick up from school, and the other would drop school, start a bit later, and then finish later. So we used to. So
the bit that was being squeezed was kind of free time and sleep. You were working long hours and the business.
It's a different mindset, isn't it? And I think the generation now have got it sorted. They're, when I look at practice owners now who go, no, I'm going to do 3 days clinical and I'm going to do a day for my practice and a day. We just didn't do that. We just were like, we've got to, it was just the way everybody did it. So you didn't question it. We have to do the clinical hours and to make the money, especially in the early years, we absolutely had to. And then we'll shift that. And over time that got easier, of course. But certainly it was just a case of I mean, I did a couple of sessions. I think when Bethany was about 8 weeks old, I started and did a few sessions and then went back to work full time when she was 13 weeks. That's that.
Yeah, it's a very
that was
different time,
You
isn't
have to
it?
do what you must,
know.
don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was just a necessary part of life. So I think it was very, very different to, you know, that work-life balance just wasn't an option.
It was a work balance.
And then there was a big change again when in 2010 you then joined Denplan, and then further on in 2019 you then became clinical director for Simplyhealth and Denplan. But what was that transition and shift like from kind of being in a practice as a clinician to then stepping more deeply into the business side of things with Denplan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was forced into it basically. So I, that sounds terrible, but I basically got hit by an autoimmune eye condition, which I had sort of once before I had Bethany. So many years ago, she's now 25. So many years ago, and then I didn't have it really again until about 2008. I started getting it, especially in my right eye, and it would flare and I would have to have my pupil dilated and steroid drops, and it would go after a little while. So it wasn't too disruptive. And then early 2009, we were away skiing actually, and I just couldn't sort it, and got off the plane and literally ran the Royal Berkshire Eye Casualty and said, I need to get in now. It was a Sunday. Can you hold open? Because they usually close at lunchtime. And that was the first time I then had it injected with steroid. And then I got up the next morning and I couldn't see anything out my right eye. So
Oh my word.
I then, so I then was 5 months fixed dilated in both eyes, because the other eye was going at that stage as well. So I was fixed dilated both eyes, which meant I couldn't drive, couldn't read, certainly couldn't do dentistry, lots of stuff.
That's really destabilizing.
Yeah, flip.
Yeah, it was a big shock, because it's, you know, it was suddenly literally like overnight almost. And then, as I say, for those 5 months, I didn't know at all what my vision was like, because I was so fixed dilated that I had no concept of what was going to be like once I wasn't dilated. So it was scary. It was really, really scary.
The fear of that must be what's going to happen at the end.
Yeah, you just don't know. And I always do say to people, when people complain about dentistry or they don't like dentistry, and I said, just wait and see if you feel like it's being ripped away from you, because then suddenly you will realize what you love about what you do. And I just had no idea, and I didn't go back to work until it was 8 months I had off work in the end. And so I could do things on the business as the eyesight got better, especially once I got after those 5 months. And what was interesting in that time frame was that from a business perspective, was that I had time to completely work on the business, and we actually increased our profits that year massively. So so because I your point around how did you have time to run the business, suddenly once I had time to run the business, and my ex-husband was doing a brilliant job, you know, seeing all the patients, was that I could actually look at it and go, maybe we should do this or do this. And so it was a big shock. And when I went back to work, I was like, it would flare and then it would settle again, and it would flare and settle again, and I'd been on oral steroids and all sorts. It was a horrible time.
So prior to that last flare, did you treat your last patient clinically before that last flare? Did you get back to clinical work? I managed to keep up, then went back and saw a few patients clinically, and for the first few years I was okay. I could still do everything, and then because of the damage to my right eye especially, my depth of field started to get worse and worse. So it was 2016 that I stopped completely clinically. But if I hadn't been in my own practice, I wouldn't have continued that long, because I could essentially hand anything over that I couldn't do, would just hand on to my ex-husband. There's some kind of funny quirk, isn't there, in there, that you, prior to that date, you'd already started to show an interest and get involved on the business side of dentistry, so it was easier for you to stay in the profession. I don't know if do you know Kaval Patel, Kana Dental Health Group?
Yes, I do. Yes.
So Kaval had something similar. He had an eye condition that culminated in him unable to treat patients anymore, but he'd already started to build his group. And so he had a similar situation where he was able to kind of pivot into the business side, but still within the profession, because of the work he'd done before. And you're similar in that you'd already started developing that
wider perspective
area.
Almost of what's happening. And because we were big Denplan clients, they knew what was going on, and so I was approached by the then chief dental officer to start a day a week in 2010, and yeah, the rest is history, really. I sort of, I would describe it as getting sucked in, really. So, but realised that I had to do further education, and I had to expand who I was, because I didn't know where I was going to end up. So I did my master's in medical ethics and law while I was still doing some clinical, and I did a risk management level 7 and mentoring coaching level 7, and all of that was actually still while I was doing some clinical. But I knew that I was going to get to a point when I was going to have to stop the clinical, and needed to have backup, really. So yeah.
So, so clinical director at Simplyhealth and Denplan. What are the 3 or 4 bullet points? What does that cover off on a day-by-day basis?
It's a really varied job. It's a really
20 or 30 bullet points then.
Yeah, it's a really unique job. And I think because I've come up through the company, I probably get involved in lots more things than I probably necessarily need to, but because of my background of knowledge of the sort of the wider space, and especially in the Denplan side of it, because obviously I know the business from inside and out. So the Simplyhealth side then is, I'm overarchingly is sort of governance, clinical governance, but of course it's different to a practice governance, clinical governance, if you can imagine. So it's much more, what do we need to do? Simplyhealth is an FCA regulated business, so my role is a senior management function, so I've had to learn and understand FCA regulation, that kind of thing. So it's a new level of obviously to know deep level, but enough that I need to understand how, an insurance business works and so on. So but to your point around my interest in business has given me sort of a curiosity, I guess, to do that and learn and absorb. People do tend to kind of put me into a box and say, oh, she just knows clinical. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure I know much clinical at all anymore, actually. I know far more about everything on the other side. So yeah, it's very, very wide ranging, very support, primarily my team's support practices on the Denplan side, with compliance and so on. But on the other side, on the Simplyhealth side, it's about product development and partnerships, and so it's really, really
fascinating.
wide. Yeah.
And is the years ago, soon as if you even uttered the word sales in the context of dentistry, you're going to get shot down. And now I think people have got way more comfortable blending the clinical side of dentistry with the business side of dentistry. And I guess a business like Denplan is probably towards the forefront of how they manage business with the clinical. And obviously there's clinical outcomes of patients, but there's no doubt that from a patient point of view, how you feel and the confidence in that delivery of that service has a big bearing on the ongoing success of that. Is business and clinical is there a strong overlap within the Denplan world where business and clinical work together hand in hand? They're both are appreciated.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, when you look at the premise of Denplan, it was very much founded around that. And it's 40 years next year. And that was very much around that patient care perspective and patients having the ability to budget for care. But also from a practice perspective, how you had that regular income that gave you that stability, or gives you that stability if you've ongoing. And so that fundamental model hasn't changed. It's about looking after patients, encouraging them to come back regularly. It's focused on prevention. Everything's focused on prevention. If you look after those patients well, they're loyal, they stay with you. But it gives you, from a practicing perspective, and certainly from a practice owner perspective, that nice fixed income that you can then think about the rest of your business based on, but your mortgage is paid and your staff are paid every month and so on. So and that fundamental premise hasn't changed, really.
And you said recently that you're increasingly enjoying quiet and calm, which I kind of get, because it sounds like it's not chaos, but it's been a very, very busy period. You like walking, being out the dog. And I think in the modern world, it's becoming increasingly hard to become disconnected. I think we're so available, and I think it's partly our own fault with smartphones and everything else. We've got these things attached to us all the time. But you said about like on your own or with others. What's the on your own bit? Are you comfortable with your own company?
Yeah, it's really funny. When I was younger and used to do Myers-Briggs and stuff like that, I used to come out sort of sitting on the border between introvert and extrovert, which people were always quite surprised about, in the sense that I'm quite busy and chatty. Now, as I've got probably over the last 10 years, I've realised that I'm actually about 80% introvert, which people find quite surprising. But when I really dug deep into that, it answered a lot of questions to me about why I was struggling with certain aspects, why things would tire me out, why I could, never feel comfortable if I was in an environment of lots of extroverts and so on. And it's taught me a lot, and I've embraced that, I think, and really taken that to heart of who I am. And having grown up in a big family, you're always on, you're in that environment, and it's taken quite a lot of discipline almost to listen to my introvert side. But what I realized once I started doing that was how much happier I was, how much more productive I was, how everything I did was better. But it can feel almost there's a fabulous book called Quiet. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's a fantastic book because we live in an extrovert world. So if you're very introvert, that's actually really, really hard, and because you are expected to be extrovert all the time. And learning when I can be completely introvert, and that I need a certain amount of introvert a day to be able to stay upright and functioning. It was a massive learning, and so powerful. So that's why things like the dog and I will go out for an hour first thing in the morning. And okay, I don't mind if I bump into a couple of people and say hello, but please don't walk with me.
Yeah, you don't want to have a conversation.
Have that time on my own, and I think it's it's something I taught my daughter to consider quite young, because I was by the time I worked it out, I was nearly not halfway through my life, but I was a big chunk through my life, and and as I say, I think if I'd known it much earlier, there are so many different things that I would have done that would have just given me more energy. I think it's such to an extrovert that can't understand how can being on your own give you energy, but it absolutely does. So I think that discipline of having my own time, especially doing a job like I do, where you're full on and you're busy, and but I can quite happily spend a whole weekend on my own.
It's very interesting, isn't it? My friend, who was a chief executive of some big old firm, and he said, because of the position you're in, you sort of have to behave in a certain way. But he said he classed himself as a synthetic extrovert.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
He said, I think there's lots
you've got
of
to
us
be
that
something.
But I think there's lots of us that are, and I think for your part, it's great to have the self-awareness that says my comfortable state is an introvert. Therefore, quiet time, being on my own, I'm totally happy with that. Yeah. But you're also right in that the world is becoming such that everybody wants to talk to us and see us, and we have to post on social media. There's this visibility that was never there before. But
do you remember that stuff we did at RADA? So we did some management training at RADA, and it was really interesting because they did this whole thing about the fact of that if you're neutral, which means you're neither happy or sad, but the assumption is you're actually grumpy and miserable, and it's a bit like
almost
that,
like wasn't allowed.
Yeah,
Neutral
it's
wasn't
almost
allowed.
Like if you want to be yourself, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's mad. It's mad.
It is really bad. And the thing I've done the last couple of years as well is I've been brave enough to go on holiday on my own, and that then becomes another layer, because socially people go, "What? You're going on your own?" And friends will go, "Well, I'll come with you." No. I want to go on my own.
I don't want you to.
I love you dearly, but I'll go on another holiday with you another time. Actually, and that's been quite hard to do. I think I did the first one about 2019, and I'm about to go.
Was that a long run up? Was that first one? Was that a long run up to get to the point where you kind of got to the airport on your own?
Yeah, I think so.
Someone
you know,
dropped
I was
you off.
coming through. Yeah, I was coming through my divorce, and I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to be able to do this. So it was a real push out my comfort zone. I went to Oman, of all places, as you do.
Wow.
But I had such a fabulous time. I just went for 6 days, and I thought, right, contain this.
Yeah.
And it was great. And I think then I'm going off to California in a couple of weeks on my own for 2 weeks. It's fine.
Nice.
You know, I've done California before. And suddenly you realise that, again, it's that, but it's breaking social convention, because people think I had to break that. Oh, that's weird. You're going on your own. Well,
but also,
that's true, actually, isn't it?
It feels like there's kind of a link and a strength that came from your childhood here as well.
That's what I'm thinking. It goes back to
you've kind of you've moved around a bit. You're pretty cool with different cultures and different environments, and the tools that your parents perhaps unwittingly gave you all the way back then are now serving you incredibly well.
Robust. I like that word.
Yeah. Now it's fascinating, isn't it? How all these different bits and elements they come together and they join up. And then from a professional point of view, you then were awarded the Fellowship of College of General Dentistry in 2023. So clearly and when you rattled off a couple of, postgraduate, not necessarily clinical or dental work you did when you were in Denplan, this lifelong learning, that's important to you, isn't it? To keep doing more and more things.
Yeah. I think it's about development, whatever that development is. I think for me, certainly, I always have to have something. So whether it then could be out of dentistry, I went through a patch where it was all sort of physical things. I kind of did a 14K swim down the Thames, then I climbed Kilimanjaro, and so there were a few kind of sort of things like that. And then so it's almost like I like to develop. So it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't have to be associated with dentistry. It can be something different, but
not pottery.
Not pottery. Nothing artistic for me, basically.
Really? You're not artistic at all?
Not at all.
Isn't photography artistic?
I could take photos.
There you go.
Photography is artistic.
Yeah, photos is as artistic as get, but yes, certainly, no, nothing. So I've played instruments and things like that, but from like pottery or painting or no.
Not your bag.
It's quite interesting, though, isn't it? That thing. I've played instruments. I can't play a single instrument. No. So to me, that's artistry. So, do you know what I mean? It's that funny thing. Is that no. So I can't do anything like that. But no. It's fascinating.
In the intro, we also said you're the Director of Policy and Research at the ADG, the Association of Dental Groups. What's the mood like within the corporate world at the moment?
Yeah, it's good. It's been really interesting. So I've been doing that for just almost a year. So, and I do a day a week doing that. And it's great to work from a development perspective, going back to development, to work in a very different team. And my background originally has always been very independent practice based as opposed to groups. So it's been really great to see the side of groups and see a very different side of them. But a lot of buoyancy, a lot of frustration, as you can imagine, around getting people into the country to do dentistry and how we can improve that and improve systems to get people in, obviously with a lack of access and so on. But a sort of real want to do something about the situation that we're in and get more people in to be able to deliver dentistry so that we can provide more access. So that's a big focus, which is similar across the board, but it's interesting to have that to see dentistry from a slightly different perspective.
You've had a hugely varied dental career. So if you had to distill it down to one takeaway learning, what's the key thing that you've taken from your career so far in UK dentistry? I say so far because there's obviously still lots more for you to do. But you've already done so much.
Good recovery.
Good recovery. I think my thing is just to take every opportunity, and because you don't know what you're going to like and what you don't like. We started doing policy and lobbying work for Denplan about 5 years ago, and there's always been some, but we really ramped it up about 5 years ago, and that's an area I would have said to you, do I want to do that really? Speaking to government and this, that and the other, I love it, absolutely love it. But I wouldn't have known that. So my view has always been you have to take every opportunity that's given you. And that's what I've tried to do throughout my whole career. And if you don't like it, you stop doing it.
Say yes
And dentistry is so wide. I think people think that dentistry, they think about the clinical aspect of dentistry, but even the clinical aspect is hugely wide.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the world that surrounds dentistry, clinical dentistry, and props it up and keeps it going and does all of that stuff is huge. And so there's so much opportunity to if you don't quite like what you're doing at the moment, to have a look but still use, I think especially our skill sets are massive, and so it's not until you come out of clinical and obviously I was forced out of it, but you suddenly realize that your skill sets are so
very transferable.
Really transferable. And that's a real strength to our profession, I think. But we've got to just be in this bit.
Tunnel vision.
So
I think we've found that
take opportunity.
Yeah, I think we found by doing this podcast that you realise that there's one person in the surgery holding the handpiece, and then there's another 30 or 40 people behind them. And whether they're dental reps or, engineers or nurses or therapists or practice managers or compliance people, whoever it might be, there's all these other people. And I think you're right. And on the point of saying yes, I think saying yes is important as well, because if you say no, at some point people stop asking you.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
new opportunities don't come. Whereas if you say yes, at least you start to find out the sorts of things that you might.
And then you can always change, can't you?
Exactly.
If you don't say yes, you just don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also I think as well that team thing, teams in dentistry is becoming more and more that they're being appreciated, but I wouldn't have been able to do anything that I've done without the teams that I've worked with. So, team is huge in dentistry, really huge.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. We have to now ask you a couple of questions because it's got to that time. The questions we have for you, the first one is, if you were a fly on the wall in a situation, where would you be and who would be there?
So this is a weird one, and I'm going to give you a weird answer.
Oh, good. We like a weird answer.
Honestly, weirder the better.
Strange ones.
I would want to be in Russia in the time of the last Tsar, in a room with Rasputin and the last Tsar and Tsaress, and understand how that dynamic got to where it got to.
Well, no, we haven't had that one. That is a somewhat unusual one. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
give us some more context. So what's happened?
Yeah, I think because I'd moved around so much when I was younger, I never did history. So somehow I just missed. I did some Kenyan history and then I moved back and it was O-levels and I just basically never did history. So it was a bit of a thing I got then when I finished dental school that I wanted to read history. So I just started reading lots and lots of autobiographies, biographies, histories, usually big, thick tomes. I'm a huge reader. So big, thick tomes. And my mum has been to Russia lots of times, and one of my sister-in-laws is German, but she she was East German, so she's got a lot of background with Russia. And somehow these books started floating around the family and my early 20s around the last Tsars and Rasputin, and I just couldn't get enough. I just read and read them all, but I never have. It's one of those things. It's just there's so many unanswered questions, and how did that man come in and create so much influence and so much? There you are.
It's a very enigmatic sort of influential, as you say. How did he get there?
Yeah, and there's a sinister. There's so much negative in that, isn't there? And yet theoretically, it came from the core and that center of looking after that little boy.
I say that.
And
was
yet,
son,
what the implications of that to the world was so massive. So, how did that actually work?
Brilliant. And if you could meet somebody, who would you like to meet if you were given the opportunity?
And it can't be Rasputin.
Yes,
it's can't be right. No, I don't actually want to meet him. I just wanted to be a fly.
Just sort of read about it.
If I met him. So, if I met somebody, I would like to meet Millicent Fawcett. So yeah, I think. When you look back at the history of, for myself, I'm still very grateful for the opportunities I've been given as a female. I still realise that there are many places in the world where I would not have that opportunity.
Very true.
And that we and the women like her were such forerunners across the world, really, of pushing forward. And of course, she did it in a very political way and a very measured way, and without the violence. I totally appreciate then the people who had the courage to do what they did from a suffragette perspective as well. I think they're amazing. But the fact that Millicent Fawcett was very focused on trying to do it through the roots, and having done sort of all my policy and lobbying stuff, I think, God, that must have been so frustrating. But actually the fact that she did that, and, you know, her and obviously so many other women at that time and men to get women the vote is obviously something that, I wouldn't be doing what I do and all of that if people like her hadn't been brave and courageous.
Wow.
Brilliant. Cheers, Catherine. That was wonderful.
Yeah, really
very,
interesting.
very
Thank you.
enjoyable. We covered a lot of ground in that episode. And yeah, it's a wonderful story. I love the way that it all joins up, and that conversation around your childhood was critical. I think if we'd have missed that piece, I think everything else wouldn't have probably joined up to
Ties
the extent
together,
that it did.
Brilliant.
We
Thank
are
you.
all
Thank you for having me.
No, not at all. It's been really,
Our
really
pleasure.
lovely.
Thank you.
Look after yourself and keep well.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.